Good afternoon and happy Friday. I'm Deirdre Henneberry and I'm the Associate Director of the Museum Studies Program. And I'm really happy to welcome you to this final Museum Studies Program event of the semester. It has been a wild but very enriching year in our program with a full slate of visiting scholars, public lectures, and exceptional student presentations. As we continue to negotiate the hybrid world of COVID, our programs have been both virtual and in person, and I think we've done our best to maximize the positives of each modality. Thank you for joining us today, and for those of you who have been able to attend and contribute to our events through the year, thank you for sticking with us. The Museum Studies program acknowledges that the University of Michigan is located on the territory of the Anishinaabe people. In 1817, the Ojibwa, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations made the largest single land donation to the University of Michigan, offered ceremonially as a gift in the text of the treaty at the foot of the rapids, so that their children could be educated. We acknowledge the history of Native displacement that allowed the University of Michigan to be founded. Today, we reaffirm contemporary and ancestral Anishinaabe ties to this land and their profound contributions to this institution. Today, in this Museums at Noon event, we are very fortunate to have two doctoral candidates, one in art history and one in ethnomusicology, join us to share their insights into their museum studies internships. Both Isabelle and Chuyi will share a brief presentation, which will be followed by a period of Q&A. As both of our speakers are presenting, please be sure to note your questions or comments in the Q&A window button, which you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Isabelle Gillet is a PhD candidate in the history of art. She earned her master's degree from the History of Art graduate program at Williams College. Isabelle's dissertation focuses on portraits of women in France during the post-revolutionary monarchies in relation to civility as a normative and oppressive construct. Isabelle's research interests include the history of female citizenship, portraiture practices, and performance studies.
Thank you, Deirdre. Museum object labels are frustrating. They often either redundantly describe the object in front of which we are standing. Sometimes they will refer to an object we can't see. Most of the time, they spit out facts with the enthusiasm of a dictionary entry. I am not alone in thinking that museum labels are dissatisfying. In fact, the University of Michigan Museum of Art, I don't know why I changed slides. All right. The Museum of University of Michigan Museum of Art got rid of labels altogether for their reinstallation of the apps a few years ago for an exhibition titled Collection Ensemble. Museum guards reported that visitors would ask them a lot of questions. They were looking for some interpretative guidance. And I firmly believe that we need to rethink the type of information that object labels deliver, the tone in which they convey information, but most of all, as museum curators and educators, we need for visitors to know that there isn't an omniscient narrator to the museum. There isn't someone, an authority figure, who determines the 200 words interpretation to a work of art. That is a lie that perpetuates the idea that art historical museum knowledge is a stable field. The museum labels that we read today were rewritten and will be rewritten. We have to be honest in the fact that these labels are written by individuals. And I want to be clear that this talk isn't just about museum labels. It is about the narrative voice that visitors encounter in the museum, the voice that guides them through the galleries. During the 2020-2021 academic year, I was the STEM Fellow in Digital and Public Humanities at UMMA. The Museum Studies program generously funded a practicum that allowed me to extend my fellowship at UMMA. Over the course of these 18 months, I learned how to mediate university engagement with classes across campus. The short way to describe a university engagement is to say that a professor from our campus will reach out to the museum and request an engagement. In response, someone from the University Learning and Programs Department will put together a session assembling a number of works of art that relate in some way to the class. And I want to emphasize that this isn't sort of a tour of the galleries. My slides keep shifting. I don't know how to stop this. It's very annoying. And so in response, someone will put together a session assembling a number of works of art that relate in some way to the class. Typically, the discussion will include an emphasis on visual analysis, visual literacy, or critical visuality to develop, to encourage the students to trust their visual intuition, to develop their own interpretation of an artwork in relation to class's theme, but also to the world more generally. This is a sample of the classes for which I mediated university engagements during my fellowship. My knowledge in either one of these fields was irrelevant. What mattered was really my ability to raise questions, to invite the students to appropriate the works of art for themselves, to get the works and the discussions to trigger their curiosity. And that is really the first thing that I wanted to insist on for this talk. What happens when we ask visitors questions, inviting them to reflect on their own impressions or responses to an artwork instead of telling them what to think? In and of itself, as fact, was not going to create and to impress a long-lasting memory in a visitor. I also strongly advocate against the preconceived notion that to give a tour, one has to be a ventriloquist of information. And to that effect, I drafted a guide on how to lead a tour in 10 steps in case you have not prepared for it. Arguably, as you'll see, the title is deceptive. You do have to do some preparation, but the goal of this guide that I'm going to share now is really to demystify what is needed to turn a museum visit into something engaging. And I'm quickly going to go through the 10 steps. So the first step is to integrate a land acknowledgement. Each museum owns and protects works of art of historical importance, but the land itself on which it was built, the land that both supports and grounds the institution, is also deserves to be recognized. And this land acknowledgement does not have to be dry or perfunctory. I think it comes on each one of us to make it into our own. The second tip in this guide is to hatch a preliminary plan and to share that plan with the visitors, who will often feel more at ease when they have a general idea of what to expect during their time, especially the length of the tour. The third tip is to invite visitors to ask you questions about the museum, to demystify some aspects of the behind the scenes. I like to share fun facts about the number of works of art that the museum owns, the oldest one, the most recent acquisition, any type of information that sort of creates, especially for first-time visitors. The next tip is to let visitors decide of the theme for the tour. That works especially well when there's not a predetermined theme, especially around an exhibition. It invites them to feel like stakeholders in the tour itself. The next tip, and that is probably the most important one, is to think of the type of questions that as a mediator you will ask of the visitors. And here is a list of questions that I want to read for you that I've labeled as foolproof universal questions, such as, what do you notice first? What is happening here? What surprises you? What kind of care had to be taken to make this thing? How long did this take? And what else besides physical labor did it require of the maker? If it were unmade, how might the world be poorer by that unmaking? Where can I live in the world the artist imagines? Would I be welcome here? Who can live here and thrive? And this series of questions was inspired by Seth Rodney's post-pandemic manifesto on looking, which you can retrieve through the QR code I put in. These questions really let the visitor know that there are no boundaries to interpreting a work of art. It does not have to be restricted by some kind of interpretative canon. I also love how they encourage the viewer to appropriate the work of art. It encourages them to perceive in the works elements that they can relate to on a level that isn't purely intellectual in an academic sense. The next tip on this list is to mediate a discussion. And these bullet points are really just emerging from teaching and instructing practices, which is to respond to comments or observation with more questions, to rephrase and echo back, or to dig into a follow-up question. And of course, ask the rest of the visitors in the tour to also engage in a conversation. Another type of response that we wanted to put in this guide is emoji responses. And that is a way to say that a response to a work of art does not have to be eloquent. Sometimes a thumbs up, a shrug, or just a nod is enough of a starting point to start a discussion. And I think it's really important to also lower the stakes of any type of response for it to be more inviting. Then you might encourage the visitors to think of questions they would ask the curator, questions that they would ask the artist, or if they had to do research on this artwork, where would they start? What I want to convey here is that if that initial seed of curiosity is planted, if that sort of appropriation with the work of art is present, then I think there can be an impetus to find out more through the object label, through the museum's website, on the internet, anywhere. But I think the intention and the interest for the work of art has to be there first. Because all of that information is available to anyone who seeks it out. Towards the end of the tour, it's always a good idea to invite some time for reflection and encourage visitors to make connection with things that are familiar to them outside of the museum, and to sort of package the experience of visiting the tour into some kind of takeaway that is meaningful to them. And then one last thing to consider is invite the visitors to reflect on the choices that were made by curators, by installation technicians, or educators that might have crafted certain messages in an intentional way. And that is all part of trying to break down the idea that a museum is a very stable sort of ground of knowledge that is unshakable, which is absolutely wrong. And then the QR code here will lead you to the Google Doc that has this 10 steps guide. My colleague Grace at UMMA helped me revise it. Now I want to shift gears and touch on another component that I thought a lot during my fellowship at UMMA, which relates to museum outreach. And I think museum outreach is often thought about and quantified, especially when one wants to highlight DEI efforts. in terms of how many classes from underserved communities have been welcomed. But that is a narrow conception of outreach. And instead, I wanted to think about how many voices are invited to speak on behalf of the collection. And I come back here to this idea of the museum's omniscient narrator. I certainly believe that as long as museum labels sound that like they are spewing some kind of universal truth, some kind of prioritized knowledge, visitors will be misled into thinking there is some kind of agreed upon threshold of knowledge required to appreciate art. Visitors don't want information, I think they want direction. They can find information on themselves about the artist, about the works of art, about the exhibition, whatever it may be. Labels should disclose through either voice, tone, or content, their sort of humanistic individual weaknesses. And this leads me to the project that I worked on for most of my time at UMMA. It's emerged from a sentiment that museums need more personal narratives in their interpretation of objects that reflect the diversity of knowledge and experiences. I think there is also a need for more informal and a faster turnaround in public-facing publishing platforms. And this resulted in a project I called Insight, which is a curation of essays written by folks from the broader U of M community. I think here, and especially at U of M, we have a tremendous pool of intellectual and financial resources. There are individuals, whether professors, graduate students, who may not be art historians, but whose visuals and critical skills are outstanding. In conducting my project, I scoured blogs, websites, any sort of individual departmental websites from humanities departments at U of M Flint, U of M Dearborn, and U of M Ann Arbor. And I eventually reached out to a small number of individuals. I received 4 positive responses, and I invited each of these individuals to write on an object from UMMA's collection. They had full liberties in terms of how they wanted to go about writing about this work of art. The essays went through a round of edit, and all the contributors received an honorarium. I lost my, right. The resulting essays, which I will share with you, are beautiful because they are passionate yet informative. They are personal yet grounded. They are inspiring yet accessible. They are also relevant and timely. All 4 of them are written with a personal point of view, in which I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to be transparent about the personal nature of interpretation. And I will end my talk here by reading from each of the 4, introducing and reading from each of the 4 essays. Deborah Smith Pollard wrote about Prentice Taylor's lithograph Macedonia AME. Pollard is a professor of literature at U of M Dearborn, and her research focuses on gospel and church music. In her essay, she writes, in fact, not only in the 1800s, but across generations, there have been different styles of singing and worship within the AME church. The kind of diversity that also exists in virtually every Christian denomination to which African Americans belong. Prentice Taylor's lithograph, created after he witnessed 3 hours of a church service at Macedonia AME in Charleston, South Carolina in the early 1930s, can be seen as an homage to the way many respond during church, even though there is an equal number whose actions are decidedly different. Mary Jo Kiesman teaches at U of M Flint. She focuses on English Renaissance authors and subjects, and she has a secondary interest in travel writing to the Middle East. In her essay is about a photograph by Pascal Seba, she writes, maps of deserts areas are often blank. When you get there, the landscape is blank too. How do nomads and traders navigate? A rise in the ground, a big stone, a vestige of ruin, and every possible hollow. in which there may be water or marks sufficiently distinguishing to the numbed eye. The skeleton is a way mark with a rib cage like a vaulted nave of a church, shelter in the storm. To be changed by Pascal Sebast's contemplative photograph, we need to submerge it in the rhythms of our inner lives and in the free movements of our feelings. We need to walk with it into our own desert places. Ian Shin wrote about Nikki Esley's The Seniors Project, and Shin is a history professor at U of M Ann Arbor. In his essay, he writes, "The Seniors Project evokes different, gloomier feelings. In the center, an elderly woman, Lee, sits on an octagonal cement block in the courtyard of a residential high-rise complex. Her facial expression is one of confusion. Her eyes are slightly crossed without seeming to focus on anything. The woman's hands cradle a worn brown leather bag on her lap. Her clothing both affirm and surprise. Her scare eyeglasses, drab brown jacket, and sagging stockings are offset by a brightly colored hat and dress. Her position within the frame, centered alone while other seniors engage each other on either side, emphasizes her isolation and helplessness. The Seniors Project 24 also evokes different feelings because of the context in which we look at the photograph today. The COVID-19 pandemic isolated the elderly as many nursing homes went on lockdown. And heartbreaking news images showed families greeting their parents and grandparents through glass and plastic barriers. Moreover, Asian Americans have been the target of over 6,600 bias incidents between March 2020 and March 2021. In some of the most horrific cases, Asian and Asian American elders have been the victim of physical assault. And finally, Brittany Moore, who is a graduate student at U of M Ann Arbor in English language and literature, wrote about Kara Walker's 5 Prints from the Suite, The Means to an End, a shadow drama in 5 acts. And she writes, "I have spent the better part of the last 6 years in the company of Kara Walker's The Means to an End, a shadow drama in 5 acts, 1995. I bring the students of my Black Women Writers course to witness this particular work every single year. As we wrestle with Gwendolyn Brooks, Zora Neale Hurston, and Toni Morrison, we find ourselves before Kara Walker's piece, attempting to court the language we need in order to do her work, and our work, justice. In Walker's hands, Silhouette becomes a vehicle to explore America's history of chattel slavery. In her pentaptic work, A Means to an End, which is alive with its kineticism, 7 human characters and 1 non-human character perform their relationship to the so-called peculiar institution. Reading from left to right, as is my training as a literary critic, each figure is engaged in movement toward or away from the orbit of the plantation. There is a bluntness to the work, for the medium does not allow for variation in color or the intimacy we feel in the presence of facial detail or facial recognition. At the very same time, and in defiance of the silhouette's signature starkness, Walker trades in sartorial specificity. A hem is in tatters, a bow is placed with perfect symmetry atop a young girl's head, a boy while nursing sports bloomers and shoes. It is through these details of clothing and accessory that through the markers we have been trained to read as phenotypical that we begin to believe that we know these characters. Finally, I wanted to thank my colleagues at UMMA, especially Dave Traburka and Isabelle Engel, for the wonderful fellowship they have allowed me to conduct. And I wanted also to thank the Museum Studies program, especially Amy Smola and Deirdre Hannabury, for putting this together and funding my practicum. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. That was wonderful. And I do want to encourage any of those who are viewing or participating today to put their comments and questions into the Q&A button there at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Isabelle, I already have some questions, but we'll move into Chuyi's presentation and then we'll come back at the end and have a robust conversation. I'd like to introduce now our second speaker. Chuyi Zhu is a PhD candidate in ethnomusicology. Her current research interests include women's lament, cultural tourism, and intangible cultural heritage preservation. Chuyi has a BA in economics and music and enjoys a wide range of academic interests, including business. She holds a certificate from Harvard's Business School Online. Chuyi has been working as an in-house consultant for Maison Youlou, a French fashion company, and has facilitated its cooperative project with the Chinese government in establishing an applied arts center in Yunnan province, which is aiming to preserve art and craft of ethnic minorities in China. Welcome, Chuyi.
Thank you for the introduction, Deirdre, and that's a great talk, Isabelle. So the title for my presentation is Museums During the Pandemic, Virtual Exhibits, Experience Design, and Innovative Collaborations. In this presentation, I will mainly talk about two virtual exhibitions I worked on as an intern of the Stearns Collection of Musical Instruments at the University of Michigan. So I'd like to start with a little bit of my background. So my academic background is in ethnomusicology. So this is the study of basically all world musics from their cultural and social context. So we try to understand not only what music is and how it sounds, but also what it means and how it reflects. While I was doing my fieldwork in China for a year on women's lament culture, I realized that since a lot of musical traditions depend on oral transmission and continuous use, and as most practitioners passed away, a lot of musical traditions are really struggling to survive, and a lot of them are actually facing extinction. So after I came back from my fieldwork, I decided to apply for the Museum Studies program because I hope to utilize both theoretical and hands-on knowledge in museum studies to better interpret and preserve both intangible and tangible musical heritage. So when I was thinking about what's the internship possibility for me, the Stearns Collection of Musical Instruments became a perfect choice for me to combine my background in both music and museum studies. So here I wanted to thank Professor Gastro, the director of the Stearns Collection, and also Mr. Ted Lotman, the collection manager, who have provided me with a lot of support, help, and mentorship. In this presentation, I would like to talk about the importance of virtual exhibits and digital tools, as well as innovative collaborations in building them during the time of pandemic. I will talk about two case studies, which are the two exhibits I helped design, plan, and build during the past year. So the first exhibit I helped build for the Stearns was in 2021. I divided the project into several stages as listed here. So the stages include decide to collaborate, brainstorm the theme, get training on technology, planning and designing, and content collection and exhibit building. And the last stage is the publicity and marketing. I'll talk about how we went through each stage and made this successful exhibit happen within 2 months. So the first step for us was the decision to collaborate. I actually started my internship in the summer 2021. And I remember 5 minutes after my meeting with the director, Professor Gastro, we had another Zoom meeting with the team from CultureVerse. CultureVerse is a nonprofit arts organization based in Ann Arbor, whose goal and mission is to bridge the gap between the museums, artists, educators, and the communities in order to make art more accessible. They do all kinds of things. For example, they provide technology and they provide training sessions on their technology, and also they provide consultation to museums and artists. So on the Stearns side, we figured this is a good opportunity to collaborate with CultureVerse and make our collection more visible and accessible. Because as a research collection, Stearns has limited public access due to space and security reasons. And because of the pandemic since 2020, student visits to the Stearns Collection was made even more difficult. So virtual exhibits become a great way for the Stearns to share its resources and to provide the public an opportunity to see the breadth of the collection. So we started our first project right away in July, and I was in charge of building our first kind of like experimental exhibit. So first, we need to decide on what to exhibit among nearly 3,000 instruments from the Stearns. After consulting with both the Stearns and CultureVerse teams, I chose to build an exhibit about the University Javanese Gamelan collection. So gamelan is the traditional ensemble music of the Javanese and Balinese peoples of Indonesia. It's made up of predominantly tuned percussion instruments. It's usually performed in lively social settings to mark important holidays and festivals. It also accompanies dances, theater, and shadow puppetry performances. So the reason I chose the gamelan collection was partly because I was a graduate student instructor for the UM Gamelan ensemble before, so that I have certain knowledge of it. And I also know that as one of the earliest gamelan ensembles in the United States, the precious gamelan collection and the still active on-campus gamelan ensemble is not known by many students. So I hope to use this exhibit and this opportunity to let more people know the existence and the history behind our gamelan collection and ensemble. So after the group decision on the theme, we next need to get training on technology to build the exhibit. So Ted and I went to CultureVerse in downtown Ann Arbor and got our training on using and building Saganworks. So Saganworks is a digital tool and cyberspace that creates virtual reality rooms for multi-dimensional knowledge and visual storytelling. As you can see here on the bottom left, there's a screenshot of Saganworks interface after you log into your own space. So this technology, this tool is very easy to use and very convenient to use. So almost all people, museums, arts organizations, and individual artists can use it. All you need to do is just to pick a Sagan type. So that's kind of like a house type. So I put here on the right screen some examples of different Sagan types. So you can see here. After you pick one Sagan type, you enter into your own space, and there will be about 70 pages of 3D furniture in the toolbox for you to use and decorate your space. And you could also upload your own pictures and text. So it's just like playing the video game The Sims. I don't know if you know the game, but I played it a lot when I was young. So you can design and build your own exhibit room however you like by putting together different furnitures and objects and adding your own materials as well. So I had a lot of fun building this exhibit actually. So after making the decision on the theme and getting trained on the tool, we start to plan, design, and actually build the gamelan exhibit. Because it was also the initial developing stage for Saganworks, we decided to start from building one gamelan room. So here is a bird's eye view of part of the room. For the design, I decided to use 3 walls for the content. So one wall is for the history part, and one wall is for musical knowledge and labels, and then the other wall is for videos. So here is one wall of the exhibit. So that's about the history that I want to center in this exhibit. So here I have a lot of historical photos for the gamelan collection. And also I talked about in this section, the UM Gamelan, how that collection was purchased and donated by musicology professor, Professor William Maw in the 1960s, who was also director of the Stearns Collection in the 80s and 90s. And also here I have a video of Professor Maw reminiscing the time when he bought and brought the collection to the school, and how in 1968, he and Professor Judith Becker formed the gamelan ensemble in school. So the next wall is for musical knowledge and labels. So for this part, I actually communicated and worked with my ethnomusicology colleagues. So here is Connor, he's my colleague. We actually did an instrument video shooting session with the help from CultureVerse team. So basically they recorded us playing each instrument, and then we attached the short video clips to the instruments shown on the wall, so that interested audience members in the exhibit can click on the clips and know how each instrument sounds and how to play them. And the last wall, I decided that the last wall is for the videos, because I want to make full use of multimedia experiences made possible by technology. So for example, here is a video of Lady Gaga's Bad Romance performed by our Gamelan ensemble, directed by alumna Megan Hill in 2015. So it's a very interesting clip to watch and listen to, but back then we didn't have the medium except for YouTube to make it accessible to people. But now with the virtual exhibit, more people will be able to watch it and enjoy it. And at last, at the center of the exhibit, as you can see here, I put a lot of food and drinks and also tables at the center, because I wanted to emphasize the sociality of Javanese gamelan music and culture, because food and socialization is a big part of almost all gamelan related activities in Java and Bali. So in the whole process of collecting content and creating labels for the exhibit, collaborations and consultation among different groups are extremely important. So for example, during the building process, I also communicated with, for example, Professor Susan Wharton, who was the previous director of the UM Gamelan. And I also talked with artist Bakwahu from Indonesia, who taught gamelan in U Michigan before. And I also conducted an interview with Steve Luonga, who is the current director of UM Gamelan. So in the interview, he talks about his plans on how he will lead and teach the gamelan ensemble. And we hope to use this interview in the exhibit to help publicize the gamelan class and also to recruit more students. So the last part will be the publicity and marketing part. So thanks to Shani from the CultureVerse team, she made a very nice 1-minute promotional video, and I'll show you soon. And we also did a social media campaign by sharing the video on Facebook and Instagram pages. And we not only shared it on the Stearns Collection page, but also we shared it on the school's carillon page, for example, and also School of Music, Theater, and Dance Facebook page, and also on CultureVerse websites, our personal pages, because we want to encourage people to visit the virtual exhibits and look around, and hopefully to visit the Stearns Collection in person as well. And we also embedded the virtual exhibits to the SMTD website. So I'll play this promotional video made by Shani, and then we will move on to the second exhibit. So we actually used the school song performed by the gamelan ensemble and the alumni during the performance as a background music for this promotional video. So it's very exciting. And I will move on to our next exhibit. So for the second exhibit, the building process of the second exhibit is still ongoing. So it's a kind of a work in progress still. So this exhibit contains more objects than the previous one, and it focuses more generally on representing the entire Stearns collection instead of a relatively specific collection. We started working on this exhibit since, I think, January 2022, and plan to launch the exhibit in September 2022. So actually, it's a very interesting story. The whole design of this exhibit actually started with a dream by Mr. Ted Lotman, the collection manager and the designer at the Stearns Collection. So I remember Ted sent me a rough sketch one morning. Here is the sketch. And he told me he woke up at 2 a.m. with his design idea and had to draw it down and share it with me. And we all thought it was a great design. So, so for the next couple of weeks, Ted started to build the Sagan and finished it with great efficiency. And I will show you our final exhibit. So it turns from this sketch to this. So pretty amazing, right? So you can see the similarity between those two. So we can see that how we stick to the original idea of design. So I will give you a quick fly-through view of the exhibit before I dig deeper into the building process. So those are at the center. Those are the 3D scan instruments. And those are the photos and paintings for Mr. Stearns. And then that's another wall with a lot of photos with performances and the Stearns Collection instruments. And that's a 3D scan person, if you can see there. And that's the director wall with all the past previous directors. And this is the center of the exhibit, which is the Gamelan room. Okay. So this time during our building process, one major question came to our mind. Since we're trying to represent the Stearns Collection, but the Stearns has so many instruments, and yet the exhibit can only show a part of them. How can we represent the whole while balancing between stuffing the exhibit with too many objects and don't have enough instruments to represent the collection? So to solve this the problem, we decided to divide the whole exhibit into different sections, as you can see here in this picture. So specifically, we have a director wall with all the past directors and personnel of the Stearns Collection, so you can see here. And then we have another wall with huge photos taken at the Stearns Collection, each representing one category of instruments to show the width of the collection. And by the way, this looks exactly like the Stearns Collection in physical space, which is good. Among them, among those objects, we highlight 10 3D scan instruments with specific labels to introduce them. And we also uploaded this 3D scans to Sketchfab, which is kind of like a public platform for people to share their 3D scans, so that different people, they can just go there and see more of the scans. So that in this way, the interested visitors can see more of the instruments from different angles, which one couldn't even do at a real exhibit. And then at the center of the exhibit is the Gamelan room. And we put it at the center kind of to show its essential and precious place at the Stearns Collection. And different from the previous Gamelan exhibit, instead of showing only Gamelan instruments, we also added more information about the puppet shadow performance and Javanese culture in general, because that perfectly fits with the essence of ethnomusicology, which is to not only study and represent music, but also the cultures and the peoples behind. So in building this exhibit, working collaboratively is extremely crucial. So for example, on our team, Ted designed and built the exhibit, which laid the foundation for the whole project. And I utilized my research skills by looking into instruments and creating labels for them. And for the CultureVerse team, they mostly provide technical consultation. And then while director Professor Gastro oversees our whole project and provides big picture suggestions. The whole exhibit building process has also been a kind of a trial and error experience for us. So we revised the exhibit many times, and we have many different versions of the exhibit. For example, in order to improve the exhibit, we also conducted user experience testing. So here is a screenshot of one of our sessions. So basically, we invited a couple of people who had never worked on or seen this exhibit before to walk around the exhibit, and then we recorded their reactions. One problem we found out through user tests was that they were easily lost in the exhibit because there are just too many objects around them, or maybe because of the technology. So to that end, we came up with this directional map, thanks to Shanley's brilliant idea. And we also, so this directional map is at the entrance of the exhibit. We also made this colorful wayfinding lines on the floor, and we attach each line to the section of its own color. So for example, this red line is leading visitors to the Gamelan room, which is built, as you can see on the right side of the screen, in red. And then this blue line on the floor is leading visitors to the director wall, which is built in blue, as you can see on the right side of the screen. So that becomes more convenient for visitors to find their way out in the museum, in the exhibit. Another feedback from them was that there's sometimes too much text to read. So they sometimes got very overwhelmed by reading all the text. So to respond to this feedback, we decided to divide text or labels into two kinds. One is the main label, which can be seen by most of the visitors. And then there's another type, which we call the description label or descriptive label. We put it in a descriptive box. So when visitors, they are interested in this specific object, they can just click on the object and they can see more of the information about that object. So I think that's another advantage of virtual exhibits, because in actual exhibits, it's usually painful for curators to decide how much they want to include as labels because of both the limited space and also the diversity or different levels of interest by the audience. But for the virtual exhibits, we're able to provide more in-depth information in the description box for audience members who want to know more about the object to read, with the main labels on the walls for general audience members, so that it wouldn't seem too crowded with the text. As shown by my two case studies, in this digital age, modern computing and interaction technology is transforming museums into more hybrid and complex spaces. Collaborations among different groups, therefore, become even more crucial in leading to successful exhibits. If used well, technology-driven designs can open up innovative opportunities to enhance communication, engage a broader audience, and make knowledge more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuyi. Another very rich presentation, and so different, yet there's certainly connections between the work that Isabelle was doing and that Chuyi was doing in these two different campus collections. So I'm invited anyone who has joined us to share questions in this last sort of 10 minutes of our Museums at Noon event. And it looks like Sherry Hill has a question for Chuyi, which I'll just read aloud. Would you say that virtual exhibits will be a trend in the future and ultimately replace more physical exhibitions? If so, why? And if not, why do you think would be some possible limitations of the virtual exhibits?
Thank you for the question. I definitely think the virtual exhibits couldn't totally replace physical exhibits, but I do think they are kind of like valuable supplement for the physical exhibitions. And as for the limitations, I guess one obvious one is the lack of, sense of sociality related to actual visit, like actual museum visit. Because if you do the virtual exhibit, you visit, you just walk along by yourself, and there's no sense of kind of like sociality and sense of belonging to a group related to visiting an actual one. So I guess that's one very obvious, very big concern related to that. So yeah, I think in relating to respond to that limitation, I guess for the virtual exhibits, we could, for example, create more forums for visitors to share their thoughts, or as Isabelle mentioned in her presentation, we can, what's the word, solicit more responses from the audiences so they can kind of interact in a way that can give them sense of sociality.
Thank you, Chuyi. A quick question for Isabelle. Two things. First, in the tour, your guidelines for giving a tour, this question about unmaking, you know, sort of the erasure of the object under examination. Was there any feedback from when you ran versions of this tour to that kind of question? How did people respond to this idea of sort of unmaking, which is really intriguing? And then secondly, a question about the UMMA Insight project. These different essays and personal narratives, are they available? Where are they available for people to sort of engage with them?
So to the first question, anytime I asked these questions was mostly targeted at undergraduates in the context of a class. So they had this sort of, you know, attentive student hat on, and I find that they were a little bit reluctant to think outside of the box, outside of the classroom box, and outside of all the boxes that they were in. So I was never able to get them to almost fantasize about what it would mean to unmake a work of art. But I really, it hasn't deterred me from trying to, or I'll certainly ask it again and continue to asking, because I think it encourages anyone to really relate to the work of art, not just as an object taken for granted because it's in a museum and because museum has objects, but really sort of have a more gut reaction to a work of art. And then the website, the UMMA's website, I'll put the link in the chat, but all 4 essays are on UMMA's website. And the current STEM fellow is going to, so this is a project that should continue to be taken on by future STEM fellows, which is something that I'm really passionate about and really grateful that UMMA agreed to do it. I think outreach should absolutely be extended to research and just to letting scholars, especially when we have such a great pool of scholars here locally, should be invited to speak on behalf of these objects, without undermining, of course, the work that curators do. I just think there's such a diversity of voices that should be heard for the interpretations that they can supply in the works. But I'll put the link to Insight's website or page.
Thank you. Now we have 2 questions from Shanley Carlton. One is to Chuyi and one is to Isabelle. So to Chuyi, how did you design the exhibit to appeal to different levels of interest of visitors? And to Isabelle, could you see virtual experiences offering more equitable ways of interpretation, given your ideas about tours and labels?
I guess I will answer first question first. I guess for me, every time when I'm creating and building an exhibit, I think a good starting point starting point is to stand in others' shoes and kind of develop this kind of empathy for the audience. So for example, when I was building the exhibit, every day I imagine myself to be one kind of, I would say like one type of possible visitor. So for example, today I would imagine I am a, for example, engineering student without any musical background, but I'm interested in music, so I wanted to go to this exhibition. And then maybe tomorrow I will imagine myself as a, for example, as a young mother. I'm bringing my kids to this exhibition with a lot of technology, interesting 3D people and 3D instruments. So maybe my kids will like it. So I will try to think from different perspectives. And then with those in my mindset, then I turn back to my role as a curator, and then I'll just build the process, build the exhibit, keeping in mind with all those possible situations. I guess that's one point. And another point, as I mentioned in my presentation, we designed different labels for different audiences. So for example, there's the main label. So for the general audiences, that's good for everyone to know. That's like the basic, kind of like the basic knowledge. And then if someone's more interested in this specific object, they can go deeper and to see those descriptions in the kind of like a hidden box. So I guess that's one advantage of virtual exhibits, because they can choose what to read. While in the physical exhibits, you either put it all there, or because there's no way you can hide some like hidden extra information.
Yeah, I think that having different types of labels is a really interesting idea and alternative to this question of equitable ways of interpretation. I think whether they're virtual or in person doesn't really matter as much as, at least to me, acknowledging that they're all coming from a person or a team's point of view. And I think it's really imperative that we remove this idea that there's sort of a universal, omniscient, knowledge that should be grasped in any institution, in any museum specifically. I think it's often something that makes people very defensive when they come into the museum, and they feel like there's only one takeaway, or certain things that they have to, dates, whatever facts that they have to get, which is, I think, unfortunate and can work around.
Thank you both. Another question, which I'll, from Julia LaPlaca, has really to do with how you might use this work that you've been doing at both UMMA and with the Stearns Collection in your teaching moving forward. What have you learned from these exercises and projects that you might apply in the future?
I guess I can go first. Well, I definitely will use this tour that I already embedded in the Schools of Music, Theater, and Dance website as kind of like a supplementary material for my teaching in the future. So previously, I was teaching Intro to Musicology, Intro to World Music to students. So there were about like 150 students. What we usually did for the Gamelan, for example, is that we brought not all, like a small part of the collection to the stage and then ask students to participate. But that takes a lot of time and strength to carry those heavy instruments, and also they're so precious. So sometimes during the transportation process, you may damage the collection. So I guess like as an alternative or as a supplement choice for that, we could also, I would definitely like talk to them about the tour and ask them to visit. And also I like Isabelle's opinion about asking for them to share their thoughts. So like we are more like the mediator instead of the, for example, authoritative teacher. Because and then in that forum or in the tour, I would ask more questions to the students, and then to kind of prop their excuse me to prop kind of their interest in this subject. So I will definitely use that in future teaching.
I do want to use it in teaching what I'm preaching, though, sort of rounds counter to the roles, especially of a GSI, which is to ventriloquize the main instructor. So I think I'll have to defer to when I have more freedom, but definitely whenever, and I do it with my friends, whenever I'm visiting a museum, they expect me as a, the art historian in the group to tell them what to think about the artworks. And I remain silent or ask them questions because my interpretation or knowledge or whatever it may be is irrelevant in light of their intuitions or impressions or knowledge. So I do practice it in a more informal setting.
Thank you, Chuyi. Thank you, Isabelle. We've reached the sort of conclusion of our 1 hour together for this Museums at Noon event. I want to thank both of our doctoral students for both the tremendous work that they've done, sort of thinking through and engaging with the collections in these ways, and for setting a wonderful bar for museum studies internships as well. So thank you for sharing this work with us. And thank you to all of our audience members for joining us for this 1 hour late in this busy semester. Take care all and be well.
Thank you, Deirdre.
Thank you. Bye.
My pleasure.